The team sheet went up at 5 o'clock. Coach Briggs taped it to the door of the changing room the same way he always did. No announcement, no conversation, just the paper and the list and whatever you felt when you found your name or didn't find it. I had been reading that sheet for 3 seasons. I knew exactly where to look and exactly how long it took for the information to land. I found my name in the second column. Substitutes. Not the starting 11. Not even 4th or 5th on the bench with a realistic expectation of early impact. Substitutes. The word that, on finals night, in a stadium filling with 40,000 people who had traveled from 2 cities to watch this match, meant one specific thing. You are not playing. I read it twice. Then I stepped back from the door and let the players behind me move forward. Some of them had to look. Some of them already knew. You develop a sense for these things in the days before a big match, in the slight adjustments to training rotations and the conversations that happen in rooms you are not quite included in. I had known since Thursday. Standing in that corridor, reading my name in the wrong column, I felt the full weight of 3 years of early mornings and extra sessions compress into a single moment. I had not missed a single training session all season. Not one. I walked into the changing room without looking back at the sheet. The room was already half full. Players moved through their preparation routines, boots laced, shins taped, headphones in, each person building their own version of the mental state they needed to perform. It was a familiar rhythm. I had been part of it for 3 seasons and I knew every detail of how this room operated before a big match. The moment I sat down, the energy shifted. It was not dramatic. Nobody said anything. Nobody pointed or stared. But there is a particular quality to silence in a room full of people who all know something, a thickness to it, an awareness that the absence of speech is itself a statement. People adjusted where they were looking. 2 players on my left exchanged a glance that was over before it fully formed. A forward named Tobias, who had been with the club 1 season less than me, met my eyes briefly and then looked at his phone. Not dismissively, awkwardly. The way a person looks away when they are not sure what their face might say if they held the contact. I sat down. I took out my boots. I began the routine. Nobody said anything directly to me for several minutes. Then the whispers started. Not about me, exactly. Not in a way that could be quoted or confronted. Just the ambient noise of a room processing new information and deciding what to do with it. My name is Kai Cole. I had been part of this squad for 3 full seasons. Not the longest tenure in the changing room. There were 2 players who had been here longer, both of them comfortably in the starting 11, both of them understood as cornerstones. But 3 seasons is not nothing. 3 seasons means something in any professional environment, and in football, it means you have seen enough to understand what the club values and how decisions are made. I had not missed a single training session all season. Not for illness, not for fatigue, not for the kind of minor knock that some players use strategically to manage their workload ahead of important matches. Every scheduled session, every optional extra, every film review and recovery protocol, present, engaged, doing the work. My numbers were good. Not spectacular by the standard of players who dominate headlines, but consistent in the way that builds genuine usefulness. I pressed well. I read the game well. I made runs that created space even when I did not receive the ball. I was the kind of player who made the team function, not the kind who made the highlights real. I had believed that would be enough. 3 seasons in, sitting on a bench I had not expected to occupy tonight, I was arriving at a more complicated understanding. Enough was not always the word that mattered. The extra work had started in pre-season of my 2nd year. Not because I was told to. Because I had done the honest calculation that most players avoid and arrived at the conclusion that the gap between where I was and where I needed to be required more than the scheduled hours could close. I was arriving 40 minutes before the first session every Tuesday and Thursday. A personal arrangement with the fitness staff, nothing formal, just a consistent presence and a clear purpose. Finishing work. Movement drills. The technical repetitions that only produce results when they are done thousands of times in the absence of an audience. The coach had never mentioned it. My teammates had seen it, occasionally, in the way you see something on the periphery of your attention without registering it as significant. Nobody had said anything. That was fine. I had not done it for recognition. I had done it because the work required to be the player I wanted to be was larger than what the schedule provided, and that was my responsibility to address, not the club's. 3 seasons of that work were sitting in my legs and my positioning instincts and the split-second reading of play that only comes from repetition. They were sitting there tonight. In the substitute column. I laced my boots the same way I always did, right side first, and said nothing about any of it. Marcus Reeve had been at the club for 2 seasons. He had arrived from a bigger league with a transfer fee that the club had announced with genuine pride, and the announcement had been justified in some respects. He was fast in a way that made defenders uncomfortable before the ball even reached him. He had a first touch that belonged in a higher tier. In one-on-one situations, he was almost impossible to contain, the kind of technical quality that crowds respond to instinctively because it looks like something ordinary players cannot do. He was also talented in a way he knew about, which is a different thing from being talented in a way you are grateful for. He arrived late to team meetings and sat at the back when he attended. He had a habit during film sessions of checking his phone under the table, which the coaching staff noticed and did not address. He called training drills for the kids, when the session required the full squad to work through basic structure. He was the kind of player who makes a team better in the moments he chooses to and less coherent in the moments he does not. In 2 seasons, I had never once heard him compliment a teammate's performance. But he was chosen. Every time. Without question. Because the talent was real, and the talent was visible, and the talent produced results that the club needed. Marcus did not pass. This is not an exaggeration for effect. It is a technical observation based on 3 seasons of watching this team operate from every available vantage point. As a starting player, as a rotating substitute, as someone who had studied our patterns closely enough to understand what we did well and what we masked. Marcus operated as a solo instrument in an ensemble. When he received the ball, the calculation was always the same. Retain possession until a one-on-one situation opened or until the pressure became unavoidable, at which point a backwards pass went to the nearest midfielder as a last resort. The through balls and diagonal runs that create goals for other players, the passes that require you to see a teammate's movement and trust it enough to commit, were almost entirely absent from his game. He was not incapable of them. In training, occasionally, he would release a pass that showed clearly that the vision existed. He had simply calculated, at some point in his development, that the personal outcome of individual action was more valuable than the collective outcome of shared play. He had the numbers to justify it, or at least to make the argument difficult to win. 7 goals this season. 3 assists. He was chosen every week. And I watched from wherever I was placed and noted the space that his choices left open. I had been on the bench before. This is important context. I am not describing the outrage of someone who had never experienced being a substitute or who had come to believe that their place in the starting 11 was permanent. I had rotated in and out of the lineup across 3 seasons. I knew what the bench felt like. But finals night was different. I had been part of every preparation session for this match. I had been in the tactical meetings where Coach Briggs walked through the opposition's defensive structure and the spaces we needed to exploit. I had worked on the specific runs and pressing triggers that the match plan required. I had done everything that a starting player does in the week leading up to a match. And then the sheet had gone up, and my name was in the wrong column. I sat on the bench as the stadium filled around me. The noise built in layers, the ground-level murmur of people finding their seats, the rising volume as the sections filled, the first unified sounds of crowd sections warming up their voices. 40,000 people arriving at a shared purpose. I sat with my jacket over my shoulders and watched the pitch being prepared. Everything I had worked for was happening without me. That was the cleanest way to describe it. Not almost happening. Not nearly mine. Happening, real, active, present, without me in it. The teams came out to a sound that I have never fully found words for. 40,000 people responding simultaneously to the sight of players walking from the tunnel. It is not simply loud. It is physical. It presses against the chest. It changes the temperature of the air. It is one of the reasons that players who have experienced it will do almost anything to experience it again. The opposition came first. Their reception was polite, the respectful acknowledgement of a neutral audience for competitors. Then our team emerged, and the sound doubled, and then when Marcus appeared the sound changed quality entirely. His name. Chanted. Not by a section of the crowd but by the whole stadium, in the particular unison that only forms around players who have made themselves synonymous with a club's identity. Marcus. Marcus. I was standing in my position on the touchline, behind the substitutes bench, in my training jacket. Nobody was chanting my name. This is not a complaint. It is just the truth of that moment, stated plainly. The crowd that had gathered to watch this match knew who they had come to see. They had made their investment in a specific kind of excellence, and they were expressing it. I watched Marcus receive the stadium's energy like a man who had been expecting it. I sat down and fixed my eyes on the pitch. Coach Briggs had been at the club for 6 years. He was a methodical man, not cold but contained. He made decisions through a process that was more internal than communal, arriving at conclusions that he presented as settled rather than discussed. He was respected without being particularly liked, which is a specific and functional dynamic in professional football. He had been good to me in the first 2 seasons. Not effusive, he was not an effusive person, but honest. He had given me clear feedback about what my game needed to develop, and that feedback had been useful. I had acted on it. The improvements were measurable, and he had acknowledged them in the context of our one-on-one meetings. This season had been different. The conversations had become shorter. The feedback less specific. When I raised my form or my positioning data in our regular check-ins, the response was increasingly general. Good work, keep pushing, we'll see how rotation plays out. Rotation was the word he used when he meant Marcus would play and I would watch. Before the match, Coach Briggs moved through the warm-up with his clipboard and his earpiece, speaking to the starting 11, checking positions, finalizing the structure. He did not come to the bench. When I caught his eye once, briefly, across the technical area, he looked away first. The decision had been made. He did not want to discuss it. The warm-up ended and the teams returned to the tunnel. 5 minutes to kick-off. The changing room at that point is a specific place, smaller than it is at any other time, despite the same physical dimensions. The collective nervous energy of 23 players preparing to do something that matters compresses the space. Voices are shorter. Movements are more deliberate. The rituals that each player uses to arrive at the mental state they need become more visible. I went through mine. Not because I expected to be called on early. Coach Briggs rarely made changes before the hour unless injury forced it, but because the preparation was mine regardless of when it was needed. You do not wait until you are called to be ready. You are ready and then you wait. The tension in the room had shifted in the minutes before we came out. Something was off with Marcus. I had noticed it during the warm-up, a particular quality of distraction in his movement, the kind that is not physical fatigue but something else. He had spoken to 2 people on his phone in the tunnel before the warm-up began. He had been quiet in a way that was different from his usual silence, which was the silence of someone who considered themselves above small talk. This was the silence of someone managing something. I noticed it. I filed it without drawing conclusions. 5 minutes to kick-off. I was watching the pitch when it happened. The referee had blown for the teams to take their positions. The starting 11 were moving outward from the tunnel. The crowd was at its loudest pre-match point, the sound building toward the moment the ball moved for the first time. And then Marcus stopped. He was 3 steps from the tunnel exit, close enough that the forward motion of the team had already carried the other players past him, close enough that the crowd in the nearest sections could see the gap he had created in the line. He stood still for a moment. Then he turned around and walked back inside. Not limping. Not signaling to the medical staff. Not holding any part of his body in the way that indicates physical distress. Just walking back. Into the tunnel. Away from the pitch. Away from the 40,000 people whose noise had dropped in a single beat from overwhelming to confused. The players who had moved past him turned. Looked at each other. Looked at the tunnel entrance. Coach Briggs was on his feet on the touchline immediately, earpiece hand pressed to his ear, expression moving through something I had never seen on his face before. The crowd had gone from one specific sound to another. Not silence. Something louder than silence. The sound of 40,000 people asking the same question at the same time. Nobody moved for about 15 seconds. That is not a long time in most contexts. In the context of a football pitch where the referee is standing at the center circle waiting for play to begin and there is a visible gap in one of the starting 11s, 15 seconds is a significant amount of time. The coaching staff moved first, the assistant coach following Marcus into the tunnel, the medical staff following behind. Coach Briggs remained on the touchline, one hand still pressing the earpiece, the other gripping his clipboard with a tension that was visible from where I sat. Players from both teams had stopped in their pre-match positions and were watching the tunnel entrance. The referee walked toward the technical area and began a conversation with Coach Briggs that I could not hear. There was no signal from the medical staff. No indication of physical distress, no stretcher, no urgency of the kind that communicates injury to the crowd in clear visual terms. The assistant coach reappeared briefly at the tunnel entrance, spoke into his earpiece, and disappeared again. The crowd had not settled. The questions were audible even at distance, not individual voices, but the combined sound of 40,000 people generating the same confusion in the same moment. Marcus had walked back into the tunnel on finals night with no visible injury and no explanation. Nobody who was left on the pitch or in the technical area had an answer. Coach Briggs turned from the touchline and looked at the bench. The look lasted less than 2 seconds. It covered the full row of substitutes, the scan of a person moving quickly through limited options and arriving at a conclusion. Then he walked toward me. I had been watching everything from the moment Marcus stopped walking. I had not moved. I had not reacted visibly. I had sat in the same position I had occupied since the warm-up ended, jacket on, eyes forward, the readiness that I had built into myself over 3 seasons of being exactly where I was needed when I was needed. Coach Briggs stopped in front of me. "Kai." His voice was controlled. Tight around the edges, but controlled. "Yeah," I said. "You're in." 3 words. The 3 words that every substitute who has sat through a match they should have been starting hears differently from the 3 words that a prepared player hears. I heard them the second way. I unzipped my jacket and handed it to the nearest staff member. I removed my bib. I took 3 seconds to run through the tactical positioning I had been holding in my memory since the week's preparation sessions. Then I walked toward the pitch. The crowd noise followed me out of the tunnel, changing shape as 40,000 people processed what they were seeing. The first thing I noticed when I reached the pitch was my teammates' faces. Not hostile, that would have been easier to work with in a way. Hostility has an energy you can push against. What I saw was something more complicated. The expressions of players who had been preparing for a match built around a specific structure, a specific plan, a specific player, and who had just had that structure removed and replaced with an unknown variable they had not prepared for. Tobias was the most honest about it. He looked at me with the kind of direct, assessing stare that says I'm not sure about this without actually saying it. The defensive midfielder whose name was on every first-team sheet this season, a player named Hugo, gave me a nod that was technically welcoming and practically minimal. Nobody said anything negative. But nobody said anything that indicated confidence either. These were people who had trained alongside me for 3 years and yet, in the context of a finals night when the team had been built around a different player's abilities, did not fully know what I was going to do with the ball. They did not trust me. Not yet. That was fine. I had been in situations before where trust was not given at the start. I had learned, across 3 seasons of professional football, that trust of this particular kind, the trust that lives in the muscles of a team, in the automatic expectations of where a teammate will be, is not transferred through conversation. It is built through action. The first 8 minutes were the hardest. The team was playing in a shape that had been designed around Marcus's tendencies. The wide channels were positioned to give him space to receive and run. The midfield structure was set to provide him with quick release options and then track the second phase of play after he had driven forward. Everything was calibrated for a specific style of play that was no longer on the pitch. Nobody passed to me in the first 8 minutes. This was not deliberate exclusion, or not entirely. It was the autopilot of a team running the pattern it had rehearsed, finding that the player it was built around was absent, and not yet having recalibrated to accommodate what was there instead. The ball moved around me, past me. I made runs that were not tracked. I called for passes that were not given. On the 9th minute, I stopped waiting. The ball broke loose from a midfield challenge, one of those uncertain moments where both teams' players hesitate and the ball is momentarily owned by neither side. I read it 2 steps before anyone else moved. I went to it, controlled it cleanly on the first touch, and played a quick combination with the midfielder nearest to me before driving into the space that had opened on the right side of the opposition's defensive line. Nobody gave me the ball, so I went and got it myself. The defensive structure closed on me quickly. 2 defenders, the right centre-back and the defensive midfielder who had tracked my run, moved together in the way that well-organized teams respond to a player entering their dangerous zone. Coordinated. Practiced. The kind of pressure that is designed to force a backwards pass and reset possession to a safer position. I did not take the backwards pass. I took 1 touch to shift the ball onto my stronger foot, used my body to create the half-second of separation that the touch produced, and drove past the first defender on the outside. The second defender was faster and better positioned. He got a foot to the ball, and for a moment it looked like the move was finished. But the contact deflected the ball forward rather than clearing it, and I was moving with enough momentum to recover the position before he could get fully between me and the line. I crossed it. The delivery was not perfect, the angle was tight and the cross came in lower than I intended, and the forward who reached it could only direct it over the bar. No goal. No direct outcome. But something changed in the way my teammates were moving in relation to me. The tracking had shifted slightly. They were beginning to recalibrate. The crowd felt it before the team fully did. That is something that happens in football. The 40,000 people watching from the outside sometimes perceive a shift in the game's momentum before the players inside it consciously register the change. They respond to patterns and energy with an instinct that bypasses the analytical processing that players are still running. The section behind our goal was the first to adjust. My name appeared in the noise, not chanted, not unified, just audible in the way that individual voices in a crowd become briefly distinguishable when they are saying the same thing. A few hundred people responding to the cross, to the run before it, to the general texture of what I was doing. Then the next move. I pressed a defender who had the ball 30 yards from his own goal, pressed him with the timing and the angle that I had drilled so many times that it was no longer a decision, just a motion. He miscontrolled under the pressure. The ball went loose. I won it, turned, and found Hugo with a direct pass into space before 2 defenders could close the gap. Hugo drove forward and drew a foul at the edge of the box. Free kick. The crowd was fully paying attention now. I could hear the difference in the sound. Not my name, not yet, but the engaged, leaning forward attention of a stadium that has found something to watch. The halftime whistle blew with the score at 0. Not for lack of effort. Both teams had created chances in the second half of the first period, and the quality of the match had climbed steadily from the uncertainty of Marcus's departure. But the goalkeepers had been good and the chances had been close without being converted, and 45 minutes had produced intensity without a winner. The changing room at halftime had a different character than it had before kickoff. Before the match, I had been the player whose name was in the wrong column, present but peripheral, the background element in a plan built around someone else. The room had processed me accordingly. Now the room processed me differently. Hugo was the first to say it directly. The press on the ball worked, he said, in the flat, factual tone he used for tactical observations. He was looking at the tactical board, but the comment was directed at me. We need more of that second half. Tobias gave me a nod. Not the minimal acknowledgement from before kickoff. A full, deliberate nod, the kind that means something among players who do not offer it lightly. Coach Briggs went through his tactical adjustments. He referenced my runs twice as examples of the spaces the team needed to exploit. He spoke to me directly at the end of the team address. The energy in the room was changing. 45 minutes to play. The score was level. I was exactly where I needed to be. Something became clear to me in the opening minutes of the second half. The team needed me. Not in the abstract way that any player is needed within a squad structure. In the immediate, specific, functional way that a team in a final level at halftime, operating without its designated attacking focal point, needs the player who can generate the actions that produce goals. I had known my qualities for 3 seasons. I had built them deliberately, in the early morning sessions and the extra drills and the film reviews that I had done on my own time. I understood precisely what I contributed when I was on the pitch and where the gaps appeared when I was not. What I had not fully experienced before tonight was the sensation of a team discovering those qualities in real time. I could feel it in how the ball found me now. Hugo was playing passes into my runs that he had not been playing in the first 20 minutes, not because he had suddenly decided to trust me, but because he had watched enough of the second half to understand where I would be and what I would do when I received it. Tobias was tracking the second phase positions I created by pressing, moving into the spaces that my defensive pressure opened before the ball arrived there. The team was recalibrating around me, not because I had demanded it, because the game required it and I had shown them what was possible. With 4 minutes remaining, the score was still level. Both teams had chances in the second half, genuine chances, the kind that require a goalkeeper to be at their best, and both goalkeepers had been. The match had the quality of a final that would be remembered regardless of outcome, and the crowd had been at its maximum volume for most of the previous 30 minutes. I was breathing hard, but my legs were still working. 3 seasons of the early morning sessions showed themselves in the final minutes of a tight match. This was the territory where the extra work pays its return. 4 minutes. 1 goal would decide it. In the moments where the pace of play requires instinct rather than calculation, I had learned that the clearest thinking comes from stillness, from a fraction of a second of simply reading what is in front of you before moving. Everything slows in those moments. Not literally, but perceptually. The positions of the players around you resolve into clarity. The space available becomes visible. I had been in this territory before. Not on this stage. Not in a final with 40,000 people and the full weight of a season. But in the fundamental experience of a moment that requires everything you have, I had been there. I was ready. The ball came to Hugo in the 68th minute. I had been counting, after a defensive sequence that pushed the opposition back into their own half for the first time in several minutes. Hugo had 2 options forward. He took a touch to settle the ball and surveyed the space. His head came up. His eyes moved to the right side of the pitch where Tobias was making a run. Then they moved to the center, where I was positioned, having tracked a specific gap in the opposition's defensive shape that I had been watching form over the previous 3 minutes. Hugo had not passed to me in the first 9 minutes of the match. He had passed to me 4 times since then. He played it now. The ball arrived on my preferred foot, at the right pace, in the right area, a pass from a player who had been watching me long enough to know what I needed from a delivery in this space. 1 touch to control. The defensive midfielder moved to close me down. The centre-back tracked the forward run on my right shoulder, anticipating the through ball. I took 3 steps. 1 breath. And then I shot. Not a through ball. Not a cross. A direct shot, struck cleanly from the edge of the box, taking advantage of the space that the centre-back's tracking run had vacated, aimed at the near post before the goalkeeper could set his feet. The shot was clean from the moment it left my foot. I have struck the ball badly enough times to know the difference in the instant of contact, the difference between a ball struck with a full, centered connection of technique working correctly and a ball struck with something slightly off in the foot position or the follow-through. This one was the first kind. I felt it before I saw it. The goalkeeper moved left. The shot went right, not by a large margin, not a ball driven into the corner with the kind of precision that requires perfect placement. Just far enough. Just past the outstretched hand of a goalkeeper who had read the direction but had not had enough time to cover the distance between where he was standing and where the ball was going. It hit the inside of the post. The sound of a ball hitting the inside of a post is one of the specific sounds of football, sharp, metallic, slightly hollow, and it is almost immediately followed by one of 2 other sounds. Either the ball coming back out into play, which produces a collective intake of breath that turns into noise or silence depending on what happens next. Or the ball deflecting into the net. It deflected into the net. I was still in the follow-through position of the shot, right leg extended, body leaning slightly forward, when the net moved. For the fraction of a second before the crowd erupted, there was the purest silence I have ever heard. The sound that followed was the sound of 40,000 people. Not unified chanting. Not organized noise. Something rawer than that, the full volume, uncontrolled release of 40,000 individual people responding to the same stimulus at the same moment, each response genuine and involuntary and combining into something that is bigger than the sum of its parts. I have been in stadiums before. I had never felt this. I ran. Not toward the crowd. Just ran, the instinctive movement of a body releasing the energy that had been compressed into the previous 90 seconds of the match into something physical. Hugo reached me first, which surprised me. Tobias was a step behind him. The goalkeeper, who had made 2 saves in the second half that had kept the score level long enough for this to happen, sprinted the length of the pitch. The substitutes came off the bench. Even the members of the coaching staff who kept their composure through everything allowed themselves something in this moment. I stood in the middle of it, in the middle of the noise and the movement and the weight of what had just happened, and I took 1 second to be fully present in it. 3 seasons of early mornings. 3 seasons of extra sessions and film reviews and consistent, unglamorous work. The bench at 5 o'clock. The wrong column on the team sheet. All of it, compressed into 90 minutes and 1 shot. The final whistle blew 6 minutes later. The opposition had pressed for an equalizer with a directness and an urgency that made those 6 minutes longer than 6 minutes usually are. A corner that our goalkeeper caught cleanly. A free kick that hit the bar and went over. A one-on-one in added time that the right back cleared off the line with a challenge that produced more noise from the stands than my goal had. But the score did not change. The whistle blew. And then the changing room. An hour later, after the trophy presentation and the photographs on the pitch and the interviews that I had not expected to be asked for I sat in the changing room among the same people I had sat among before the match. The difference was not dramatic in its expression. Players are generally better at managing the outward display of their internal states than most people assume. Nobody made a speech. Nobody directly addressed the shape of what had happened. But the quality of how people spoke to me was different. Hugo sat next to me instead of across the room. Tobias said my name first when a conversation started that involved us both. Small things. The small things that constitute belonging in a professional environment. Same teammates. Completely different attitude. I was still in the changing room when the message arrived. My phone had been on the bench with my jacket through the second half, and I had not looked at it since the final whistle. I picked it up with the intention of calling someone specific, a call I had been planning to make since before the warm-up, a call to a person who had watched 3 seasons of early mornings without being asked to and who deserved to hear the result directly from me. But the message was already there. From Marcus. I did not know what I had expected. Nothing, probably, which is what I would have sent in his position. Or something functional. A brief acknowledgement. The message read, "Didn't think you had it." I looked at it. I looked up from the phone at the changing room around me. The trophy was on the table near the door, physical, actual, the object that the season had been oriented toward and that now existed as a fact. I looked at the scoreboard visible through the window above the door. The final score still displayed on the stadium screen, visible from where I sat. I looked back at the message. I put my phone in my bag. I did not reply. Not from bitterness. Not from victory lap logic. Simply because there was nothing in that message that required my response, and everything that needed to be said had already been said, in the 89th minute, from the edge of the box, into the inside of a post that had deflected the ball into a net. Some answers do not need words. The scoreboard already had mine.